Good evening, everyone. I am Jaimin Kachar, research engineer at Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. And I am very happy to welcome you to CSTEP's virtual panel discussion. Indeed, our topic of the day is interesting one, and it is about rooftop solar, a catalyst for achieving net zero emissions by 2050. Today, experts and stakeholders are intensely deliberating whether India is in a position to set net zero emission target by 2050. And if the country is setting the target, then it will need innovative approaches and robust policy making for the deployment of clean energy technologies. So today in this webinar, we are discussing the role of rooftop solar in achieving net zero emissions by 2050. For this discussion, we have esteemed panel of experts with us today. Let me quickly introduce them to you. We have Mr. Heni Bahar, Senior Analyst in Renewable Energy segment at International Energy Agency. Mr. Subramaniam Pulipakka, CEO at National Solar Energy Federation of India. Mr. Manu Mokdal, Director of Clean Power Program at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And Mr. Chintan Shah, Director Technical from Indian Renewable Energy Development Agency. Welcome all of you, and we are very happy that you have set your time aside to join us today. It should be noticed that Mr. Anuvrat Joshi, Head of Business Development Clean Tech Solar, is not able to join us due to his immediate personal matters. So now before we get started, I will highlight few housekeeping rules for the webinar. All the attendees are requested to post their questions in the chat box. We will try answering all your questions if the time allows. We also want to inform you that this video is being recorded and it will be shared with you on your registered email IDs. Now, before we kickstart the panel discussion, I would like to welcome Mr. Saptak Ghosh, a research scientist at CSTEP. Saptak is working in energy and power sector, and he will moderate the panel discussion for the first session. In this session, the speakers will discuss the present scenario of rooftop solar in India and the reasons behind its rapid growth. These speakers will also discuss about required innovative strategies, business models, and support from the government to increase the uptake of rooftop solar by many folds. Over to you, Saptak.
Thank you, Jaimin. So the first session that we have arranged for this webinar is to understand how India's immense rooftop solar potential can be achieved despite its slow growth so far. So we know that the potential numbers range anywhere between 300 to 500 gigawatts as per various estimates made by various researchers. However, till date, only around 7 gigawatts has been installed. Although rooftop solar offers multiple benefits, as we all know, in terms of reduction in distribution losses and generation being close to consumption. But there are multiple reasons now, as we can see, we have read in multiple papers that there is a lack of economy of scale, which makes rooftop PV more expensive compared to ground mounted. There is reluctance from the discoms because they fear revenue loss from high paying consumers and improvements and upgradations in their distribution infrastructure. There is also the problem of the underserved residential sector who are not able to access low cost loans which other consumer categories can. So all these reasons have led to what we think is an unimaginable way to reach the 40 gigawatt target this year. So if we do have to reach the 40 gigawatt target, maybe next year or then cross it, how do we actually go about overcoming these obstacles? To discuss more on these issues, we have Mr. Heni Bahar from IEA, who will talk about some of the measures that they have researched upon when it comes to policy and discom engagement. And we also have Mr. Pulipakka from NSEFI, who's like a very eminent voice when it comes to representing the industry. So without taking further time, I will hand over the discussion to Mr. Pulipakka.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosh. It is indeed a very pleasant honor to address today's event. Most importantly, because rooftop is generally not the subject that is discussed in any webinars these days of late, while it was already underrated, but it was underrepresented also. And especially in the context of net zero, people have a tendency of comfortably ignoring the potential of rooftop, both literally and figuratively, when it comes to how it can actually act as a catalyst in addressing the net zero issue. But coming back to your question, you have set the context very well on how today in our country, if we look at the total installed capacity of rooftop, it is less than 20% of our total installed solar capacity. We are, as a country, the fifth largest country in terms of installed capacity, with little above 40 gigawatt of solar. And if we look at the other four countries who are before us in the list, it is not come as a surprise to say that we are the only country among the top five where the rooftop installed capacity is less than 30% of the total solar installed capacity. Now, there can be n number of factors which we can deliberate day and night on what went wrong, but all of this point out to the single root cause of this problem, which is the inverted tariff structure in the Indian context. We might be one of the very few countries in the world where the residentials pay considerably a lower electricity tariff compared to the industries and commercial entities which actually produce and contribute to the GDP. If you ask about me, sitting in Delhi, I don't pay anything for the first 200 units of electricity I consume. So virtually my bill is never in 3 digits for the major part of a year. Now, when we look at the rooftop proliferation in other countries, especially let us take the Germany example, which is often quoted. In their initial years of proliferation, more than 70% of their installed capacity, more than 90% of their installed capacity came from rooftop. Today, it hovers somewhere between 65 to 70. So why did we make the same mistake with the conventional that we made with the conventional sources and repeated it with solar energy also, is a question that perhaps has no concrete answer across today in the Indian context. Setting the background aside and setting the not so attractive environment for residentials to shift to solar aside, when we look at the problems that are now on the ground, and which is one of the reasons I don't get more than 4 hours of sleep, and as I talk to you, my team is sitting at the comfort of their homes preparing notes for tomorrow's MNRE meeting, which will decide the benchmark price for the rooftop systems for this ongoing financial year. So since I am talking about benchmark price, let me right away dwell down into this aspect of benchmark and its consequent impact on quality. We have seen over cannibalization in terms of tariffs in the utility scale market. As a country, there was nothing wrong with it. Today, we can proudly say that solar has not only achieved grid parity, but solar is one of the cheapest sources of energy, or the cheapest source of energy available to us in the country. On the distributed solar side, the cannibalization happened from two fronts. Number one, when government introduced this benchmark, the market overreacted to this benchmark concept, and in the thrust to build portfolios, we have sort of I don't want to use the word compromise, but we have sort of comfortably ignored the fact that we cannot benchmark price per kilowatt on the total cost of system, especially in a dynamic market like us. You must have been well aware of the happenings of the market today when it comes to the raw materials, the abrupt and abnormal increase in the prices over the last 6 months, and of course, what is happening with steel and copper and aluminium is altogether a different issue. So in this highly dynamic, or if I may say volatile market, trying to guide or trying to push installations with a particular benchmark price to a large extent didn't yield the results that it wanted to or it aimed at doing. The casualties for this are the quality of the installations, and the subsequent impact of the quality is sort of an untalked resistance towards solar energy among particular masses in both different urban and rural packets of our country. So this is something that I would say to begin with is a very huge hindrance for rooftop market in Indian context today. On the other side, if you look at how rooftop solar is being perceived by the utilities, Mr. Ghosh has rightly mentioned that discoms are very concerned that their high paying consumers are being sort of taken away from them. And again, the root cause of this problem, like I mentioned, is simple. Residentials pay less, industries pay more, industries have more incentive to shift to solar. When they shift to solar, utility is the one who is at the peril of it. Now, we had sort of a highly turbulent first 4 or 5 months in the rooftop segment at the beginning of this year. We all of us are aware about the prosumer rules draft that has been notified by the ministry by limiting 10 kilowatt for net metering. Now the question everyone wanted to ask and everyone was trying to ask, that is net metering really gross? I'm not sure whether you understood the wordplay or not, but I'm this much sure that all of us are very concerned about the way metering is perceived in our country and the logic behind capping the 10 kilowatt. Fortunately or coincidentally, because of the efforts, and of course as a federation we were at the forefront of it, we were able to convince the ministry to increase the cap, because according to our data, at least 85 to 90% of India's rooftop installations fall below 500 kilowatt category, and that is the segment that most of our rooftop players are highly dependent. Now when we look at the debate between net metering, gross metering, while I don't want to get into the specifics of it, it is sort of very important, or it is imperative to understand why there is a necessity to have a win-win-win situation for the developers or the installers, for the consumers, for the C&I segment, and of course the utility, which has never been talked about. Government of India has, I would say, in a very encouraging move, started including utilities at the center of rooftop proliferation since last 2 years. I would still argue that we could have done it way back, but it's still better late than never. So when utilities are at the center of this discussion and when they are in charge of rooftop proliferation, it is imperative to, I don't want to use the word incentivize, but to sort of compensate for their resolve or for their initiatives to talk about rooftop or to ensure rooftop proliferation is happening. And in our note, which we sent to Honorable Minister, which has become sort of viral in other social media platforms, we mentioned the same thing, that we have no problem if the discoms get a cut out of the rooftop installations in C&I, but let us be rational in how that cut is being determined. And I'm using cut in a very informal way, but the underlying message we wanted to send was that discoms should be part of the narrative and discoms should be involved right from the beginning. So this is the second aspect on why we have faced sort of a turbulent journey when we talk about rooftops acceptance from the utility side. The third part, which again was rightly mentioned, in fact Mr. Ghosh has mentioned most of the points that I want to touch upon, but since I am talking, I would like to a little bit elaborate on it and sort of present a school of thought that might be that is good if taken into consideration by the government or policymakers. The affordable finance is something that has been a very important factor which was directly related to the not so good proliferation of rooftop, especially in the MSME sector. With the Indo-German Energy Forum, we came out with a report where we went to the industrial special economic zones and industrial hubs in Aurangabad, in Gujarat, in Chennai, even in Karnataka, and we try to understand why these industrial units, which are predominantly comprising of MSMEs, who have a considerable burden from electricity charges, are not shifting to solar. Was it because they didn't know about solar? That wasn't the case. Was it because they were they were resisting towards the idea of having solar? that wasn't the case either. But the main case or the main problem or point we were able to understand from this survey was the access to finance. And that is where we have proposed a solution of demand aggregation. And that is not something new that we have proposed out of the box. It is well renowned and well acknowledged formula, and the economics of scale work out very well in the demand aggregation concept. And we felt that apart from demand aggregation from the end user side, it is also imperative for the government, at least the financial institutions, to come up with innovative financing ways to ensure that access to capital is easily available. Access to affordable capital is easily available to these MSME players. So this was something that we have proposed. There were a lot of discussions consequently after this report was launched. To some extent, some of them were also considered in different states, but by and large, we are yet to see a significant movement on that front. So these are the three main aspects or three main dimensions of rooftop, if you ask me, that have been responsible for not so good proliferation of solar rooftop in our country. Now slightly shifting from why solar rooftop has not been successful to what can we do to make sure solar rooftop can be successful. The writing on the wall is very clear, and we know that if the business of our industry is not the business of the government, the moment you standardize a mechanism or a policy, and the moment you provide a visibility for a particular policy over a period of time, investments automatically flow in. So what we are lacking here is consistency, clarity, and comprehensiveness when it comes to any policy related to solar, especially for solar rooftop. It is without any doubt we have to accept and embrace the fact that being in a federal structure with electricity being the concurrent subject, it is always tricky to handle something at state level while there are clear targets set at the central level. But we should take cue from the success stories in Gujarat, in Rajasthan, and nowadays I'm hearing a lot about even Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Telangana. So these are the states. If we put all together, they cumulatively they represent almost 60% of India's rooftop capacity, or even more than 60% of India's rooftop capacity. So what did these states do that other states can replicate or emulate, and how can we reduce that friction in the so-called federal structure so that the message that is passed from the top is well received at the bottom? This is something that is very important if we want solar rooftop to be successful in our country. Second aspect, which might look like something that I covered in the first aspect of the certainty, but which is actually having a far-reaching consequences, is on the retrospective implementation of rules or regulations or policy. Because as an industry, as a solar industry, especially which is in a nascent stage, I mean, I don't know, I'm not talking about the utility scale, but I'm talking about the rooftop scale. We are not that well versed or to be prepared for a retrospective change. And a change in a retrospective manner is first of all not to be entertained in any segment, especially for a segment like us. So that is something that has always been a problem. We fought tooth and nail in Uttar Pradesh. We had similar experience in Maharashtra, and now we are doing the same thing in Gujarat. And from what I heard, the bets are again on what you call Telangana and Andhra coming up with the similar provisions. So what I want to convey in a nutshell is that there shouldn't be retrospective or last minute or midnight policy changes or flip-flops that will impact the sector and have overreaching consequences on the future of the sector. So this is how I personally look at the rooftop segment in the country. And before I conclude, I would like to also mention that when it comes to the rooftop segment acting as a catalyst to net zero, I think it's pretty obvious, and I think it is a fundamental concept of having consumption or having generation where you're consuming, and in this process you are trying to save the colossal loss of energy, which in the case of conventional power plants is around 95%. And what can be better than rooftop to show or to be the poster boy for net zero emissions in the world? So I hope I have answered your question, and I'm here for if there are any doubts. And again, I would like to thank Team CSTEP for having me here, and I'm looking forward to hearing from other eminent experts in the field on the same topic. Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosh.
Thank you, Subramaniam. Thank you for those insightful words, and we should take note of what the industry is actually looking for in terms of access to finance and all the policy stability that Mr. Puripaka spoke about, because his words reflect the industry's mood as well. Going from there, we now are privileged to have IEA to be a part of our panel. It's a very, very honorable thing that we have Mr. Jaime Bahar. So I will hand over the discussion to you, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the great words about the IEA. I'd like to start, before going into India, a little bit give the perspective from the net zero. As you know, we published a net zero roadmap recently, last week. I'm sure it's being discussed a lot in India. It was a global roadmap. And I'd like to highlight a few points that makes the net zero plan happen. How we will decarbonize our energy system relies mostly on three main important technologies. The first one, or demand side management, I would say. So the first one is energy efficiency. The second one is wind and solar combined and other renewables. And the third one in the model is electrification. Why I mention electrification? Because the most of the difficult job that we have to do is not only decarbonize electricity, which we love to talk about, it's the sexiest topic, but also decarbonize the end-use sectors such as industry, transport, and heat. These sectors where electrification will play a big role are extremely important. Just want to highlight one important number on electrification is that IEA net zero scenario sees electricity demand almost tripling in the coming 30 years. This pace, if you look at the past 30 years, is significantly faster than we basically experienced, considering that last 30 years, the world achieved a significant economic growth. In that sense, it is extremely important to keep in mind electrification, solar and wind, and energy efficiency. There is one technology that basically plays a significant role in touching all of them, both on the demand side, on the electrification of the demand side, and also on the contributing on the energy efficiency, is distributed solar PV, or rooftop PV as you call it. It is also the engine of economic growth because it is the technology among all electricity technologies that creates most job per megawatt installed. In that sense, just to give you another number, that today there are 25 million rooftops installed in the world. In 2050, this will increase by tenfold in our net zero scenario. It shows you an incredible number of jobs that we need to do in the coming 30 years on the rooftop PV. Rooftop PV is also not only a job creation machine, but also at the same time regulates demand, because increasing electrification, how we can use at the source of electrification renewables, the answer is very simple, is rooftop PV. In that sense, I think it will be an important part of the decarbonization efforts. It will be one of the most important part on the end use side with the self-consumption, where we can use most efficient renewables directly, where rooftop PV will play a role. At the same time, the largest challenge that we will face with this huge electrification is what is coming up is network investments, especially on the distributed grid. So in order to tackle these issues, we need to invest at the same time on the distribution grid, because we will have more electricity surplus from solar PV panels on our rooftops or in the industrial sites, and then we need more investment to balance this. Now, I would like to take you to a story where rooftop PV or any other PV installation is at zero cost. We are talking about right now in the short term, commodity price increases, how it will affect the module cost. These are totally understandable in the short term. But in the long term, the trend will not change. In our opinion, the cost reduction trend of solar PV will continue to decline, not only with the current technology, but also with the upcoming technologies that will make the modules much more efficient, much faster in terms of the delivering power, in terms of being more responsive, but also in terms of lighter, using less materials and generating more power. So, and if the prices go down to a level where users or industries or economies or small companies can use this effectively to self-consume their own solar PV power, it will be very difficult to regulate on the government side, because on the cost side, it will be very cheap. We will reach a world, and probably very soon in India, where people may not need to sell their electricity to a distribution utility for a distributed PV system to be profitable, to make a business case. It may be so cheap in the future, I'm not saying in the next 2 years, but it will be so cheap in the future where we will maybe, people will install distributed PV along with storage facilities and will not need to sell their electricity, will try to consume with their increasing electricity consumption based on electrification, as I mentioned previously, to have a scenario where all these things that we are discussing right now about the remuneration, buyback price, net metering, gross metering, will become probably irrelevant. So we need to prepare as an industry or as a government towards this direction, because the trend shows this. Coming to India. For India, the slow uptake of distributed PV and its contribution to the obviously the decarbonization of Indian electricity system, we don't need to talk about it. It's very obvious to everybody. India has one of the cheapest system costs of solar PV in the world today. And we will need to remember always that in India, it may sound as a very unique case on its own. However, there are certain pieces of information that we collected from the IEA. It's actually similar, and some countries found solutions towards these problems. Of course, every context is different, but some lessons can be learned. I'd like to announce here that tomorrow we will be launching a specific report on Indian rooftop PV sector. That's why this is very timely. And it is called, which we prepared along with our colleagues from CEW, Unlocking the Economic Potential of Rooftop PV in India. where you will be able to see that we offer 27 solutions to 27 challenges that we identified in the rooftop PV sector, specifically in India. This is based on a workshop that we organized last year with international experts, and we developed this paper in order to give some solutions. They are in three categories. Some of them refer to short-term solutions because, as you know, there's a very ambitious target by next year that India is trying to achieve on solar PV, and rooftop PV is lagging behind. So how we can accelerate that? Some solutions refer to medium term, the others are long term. For instance, the tariff design and structures or retail liberalization of the market, how we can make more competition and so on and so forth. For us, these are very long-term or medium-term solutions that we need. These things take a lot of time. While we offer the short-term solutions, mostly in this paper, and they are focused on three areas mostly. The first one is discoms. How discoms can be involved in selling, procuring, financing the distributed PV. Why we wanted to promote discoms involvement on this? Because obviously one thing that you cannot change one year to another is the financial situation of discoms in India, as you all very well know, is not in a perfect condition. And this is obviously a barrier for them that they think they will lose money if people deploy this with PV, especially from industrial users. The solution to this that we offer, that is also implemented in several countries very far away from India, such as in Brazil, that discoms start to be a player in the rooftop PV market along with the private sector. With that, they can have two or three advantages. They can have a different business that they can use their relationship with the customers, obviously with fair competition among others. They can have access to low-cost financing, which they can provide help. They can implement OPEX-based business solutions as they are collecting the bills from the customers, as well as they can basically have a mentality of involving in the business to price the losses and actually benefits for them in a more appropriate way. This is the most important point to mention. The second point is on the financing. Obviously, financing, which is mentioned, by the way, I'm glad that we touched upon all these points that are previously mentioned in the previous two speeches in the paper. I hope you will like it. That will be published tomorrow. The second point is on financing. Obviously, for the several types of customers, financing is a large challenge. And there are a lot of different types of help by the government in order to make the rooftop PV more affordable. However, we should not think these subsidies in the long term. We should think about how the sector can finance itself and how it can have access to affordable loans in a very sustainable manner. In that sense, we need to have a regulatory structure within states or within different discoms that have offer a regulatory and policy stability. The retroactive changes mentioned in the previous speech, of course, this needs to be avoided, but also the consistency between that will reduce the risks of these projects, extremely important in our opinion. And when you simplify certain rules and regulations and permitting and contracting and open the business to private sector bilateral contracting, you will see an immediate impact on both volumes, but also on the risks associated with those volumes. In that sense, it is important to mention the part on the simplification of the procedures and harmonization of the schemes. The last point that I want to make is on policy. In a country like India, where states and federal government have different roles and different responsibilities in promoting energy sector or electricity sector, obviously it's a benefit, but it's a challenge as well at the same time for the coordination. At the IEA, we have one opinion on the net and gross or buy or sell all these policy schemes. It needs to take into account for the financing of the grid infrastructure. For the initial uptake of rooftop PV, obviously net metering helped a lot. We don't deny that. It gives the most generous incentive to users to capitalize on their electricity consumption and production and make the most out of the grid as a storage to use later seasonally. However, I would like to remind everybody that one of the reasons why this policy was in place because of lack of technology on the meter at the time, because there was no other way of accounting for the energy. The new technology enables basically the new metering technology, which should be promoted everywhere in the world, on the real-time consumption of electricity and surplus electricity and the selling of the excess. Any policy that supports rooftop PV or distributed PV as a whole in general, in our opinion, needs to take into account one important point. It needs to give stable revenues to the consumer so that they can calculate their business return on their investment. It should collect the revenues for the distribution companies to take care of the grid in a consistent way. At the same time, while there needs to be a sound regulation on the side of the buyback of the power and at a decent price that needs to be connected. If you ask me today, I will recommend everybody to use a real-time self-consumption model. If you want to support the rooftop PV, you can pay as a buyback price, whatever price you want. But at least we establish a system where, for the future, we are talking about net zero here, for the longer term, if we are going to have 240 million rooftop installations in the coming 30 years, in order to integrate them into the system, we have to have a real-time self-consumption system where we can monitor the real benefit and value of the solar PV systems we have. And on this note, thank you very much for the invitation again, and I will finish up here and we will discuss further points.
Thank you, Mr. Bahar. Those are very, very pertinent points, and we have been looking at those points specifically for the near and medium-term future. We've got some very interesting pieces of information that has been given to us, and we have some questions which have come in from the audience. So, time permitting, I would request the eminent speakers to check their questions box and see if there are any questions allocated to them. I'll start with Jamin.
Yes, I can see the question. So the question is, what is the scope of BIPV in India? So I would like to answer that. So the scope of building integrated PV is very good in India, since the nation is blessed with enormous solar potential. Number one. Number two, 60 to 70% buildings are yet to come in India as per the literature. So huge volume of building is coming up. So definitely it will have potential to have BIPV technology on that. But there are some issues why the technology is not taking up. It needs support from government. It needs consumer awareness. Number two, techno-commercial feasibility also needs to be assessed for all the states. So, so far the cost is coming slightly higher than rooftop PV cost for BIPV. So it also needs to achieve economies of scale so the cost can come down. But yeah, technology has very good potential. Cost-wise, government and the country has to do a lot. I hope I would have answered the question.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Pulipaka and Mr. Haima, I think you have questions assigned to you as well. If you would be kind enough to take them, please.
Yes, there was one question I got from regarding the modular solar rooftop solution. The question is whether the industry is considering modular rooftop systems for proliferation, especially in the residential sector. And it is a very interesting question. And if we look at the way any market evolves, the modular aspect of the solution comes actually much later and is designed or aimed to cater to a particular segment of the customer trends they have. It is very heartening to see that in rooftop also, at least since last 2.5 years, I have seen good solutions coming up. Some of our own members are implementing that in different parts of the country, and I believe that it will slowly catch up with speed in the coming days. The only part that is very tricky there is the cost part, where whether our industry will be able to match the cost expectations or not. But slowly, once over a period of time, if we achieve the scale, I think that is also possible.
Thank you. Mr. Bahar, one question is there for you, I believe.
Yes, the question is on, there's a lot of talk over one grid, one nation. Do you think that is contradictory to rooftop solar? There is a lot of talk about one grid, one nation. Yes, but I'm not sure how it will be realistic in the short term, to be honest with you. Still, European Union is trying to harmonize its grid to connect everybody in a harmonized way. And but coming to your actual question on connection to rooftop, in the end, in all around the world, if you talk about rooftop, we need to talk about retail prices and how they are structured. In some part of the world, we collect the grid money from the retail prices as a fixed cost, such as in Australia. Every day, it's a daily charge. Without your consumption, you receive a bill at the end of the month, 30 days of billing. You pay a fixed cost, which is about 30 to 35% of your bill. In most consumers in United States, most consumers in India do not pay this kind of a fixed charge for the capacity, let's say, not generation, not consumption. So in the end, it boils down to how we charge for the grid. Even if one day we have one nation, one grid, we will go back to the same question: how countries charge for their grid on their bill, on their consumers' bill. And this will become the critical question. And currently, the way we are collecting money for the grid in most parts of the world is by kilowatt hours only, doesn't reflect the real cost of the grid, which is mostly fixed. So we have a contradictory idea which was developed previously, that we charge per kilowatt hours at the time where electricity demand was growing in most parts of the world, so that the grid investments are based on this electricity demand growth. Now we have a different world in most parts, that electricity demand is not growing, energy efficiency is there, maybe not currently in India, but it will come very soon, and we will use the energy more efficiently. So how do we basically charge for electricity on a more fixed cost basis? This discussion needs to be real. We need to discuss this very carefully because the grid costs are fixed. So going back to your question, it's not contradictory for rooftop. The only thing that will be contradictory, how we integrate it into the system and how we price for the grid. There is another question. Should I answer on my talk, or should I stop here?
Please go ahead, sir.
So there is one on the new solar PV technologies. Actually, a few weeks ago, maybe last week, a new perovskite commercial plant, a small plant production line is being, I think, opened or will be opened very soon. So this technology, which combines basically silicon and another, we don't know what share is silicon right now. I think it will be there commercially, and it will be efficient sooner than we think. Now the PV sector is mostly based on the silicon-based modules. This is a huge production lines in China. It became much more efficient over time, but it is still the prominent technology. There will be some barriers for the entry of the new technology because getting the prices to the level where this mass 10 gigawatt, 20 gigawatt production lines in China, getting those low prices is very difficult. So that's why obviously the domination of the crystalline silicon market remains on its own a barrier for the new PV technologies, unfortunately. But I see that the more efficiency and the more new technologies there is room, and it is important also for diversification of the PV sector, because we see today, over the last year, the increasing price of silicon, increasing price of glass due to the demand or fires or different price increase in critical minerals. So we need to make very careful attention to diversification of the production and how we can reduce it in order to make electricity security or PV security in this case better in that sense. And I think I cannot give a date, but it will be much sooner than we think that those production lines will be there.
There are other multiple questions which have been asked, but because of time constraints, I request the respective answerers of the questions to just type it out on the chat box, because otherwise it will be a bit of an issue because we have run out of time. Just before we end the session, can we take a quick group screenshot of all the speakers, please? I think it should be done by now. All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for your insightful comments, and I once again request you to answer the questions on the chat box so that we can start the next session. It's been a very informative session, and we look forward to participation from both IEA and NSFI in the next webinar, which this is a series of webinars which we will have on rooftop PV. So the unlocking the economic potential of rooftop in India is also a very interesting aspect which we will definitely give more attention to in the next webinar, along with our efforts to work on strategies on how to use aerial imagery for potential estimation and then demand aggregation in India. So that is going to be the topic for the next webinar. I hope to see you guys there. With that, I end the session and I hand over the discussions to Jaimin.
Thank you very much, Saptak, and the speakers for such an informative session. Now we will move towards our session 2, where the speakers will basically discuss how rooftop solar can be a catalyst for achieving net zero emissions by the mid-century, and how much rooftop PV capacity would be required to contribute in emission reductions by 100%. Here the speakers will also discuss about the challenges along with required policy push and regulatory framework. I would like to welcome Dr. Jai Asundi, Executive Director at CSTEP, and he will moderate the panel discussion for session 2. Over to you, Jai.
Thank you, Jaimin. So a very warm welcome to all of you for this particular session. So far, we heard from the eminent speakers so far, of Mr. Pulipaka as well as Mr. Bahar, on the issue of the short-term issues of rooftop PV. What are the issues that we are going about? I think let us take a step back for a second to start thinking about what are the broader perspectives that we can think about. We do know net zero is in the news. Everyone is talking about that. and it is something that is clearly, over the next over the next 3 decades, if not more, and maybe a little less. So with that, let me introduce the 2 speakers that we have in this session. We have Mr. Manu Modgal. He's working as the director of Clean Power Program at Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation in New Delhi. And his key expertise is in activating clean energy transition through public-private partnerships. And he likes to call himself a specialist generalist. And he's at ease with creating inroads wherever none exists, and with the mandate to create a craft sectoral change. We also have with us Mr. Chintan Shah. He's the director technical of company, and he holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from Maharaja Sayaji Rao University of Baroda, and he has served as president and SBD and corporate affairs with Suzlon Energy, and also as vice president SBD and Suzlon Energy Limited with Suzlon Green Power Limited. So welcome to you both. Let me start with setting the context. We do know that rooftop PV has a potential to bring down emissions, GHG emissions across India by tapping across the various sectors. There are 3 big sectors that I would like to just quickly touch upon. One is, of course, the building sector, where there is an enormous rooftop PV potential, ability to generate energy where it's consumed. The IEA report also talks about residential energy use increasing over the next 30 years, especially in India. The other sector, the second sector, again, which is a big sector, is that of industrial electricity demand, which is expected to grow at almost 4.1% cumulative over the next 26 years. And if we don't serve this with renewable energy, fossil fuels will come in place. And then the third, of course, is the transportation sector, where again the IEA report talks about a huge increase in demand. And in fact, we are expecting a cumulative growth rate in electric vehicle market almost 45% over the next 7 to 10 years. And so again, here there's an opportunity. So given this, let me start with a few questions so that we can get this a little more directed. So how do we see, so this is to you, Manu, how do we see the market dynamics of RTPV playing out in the coming years, not just in the coming decade, but over the next 20, 30 years, especially when it comes to its linkages to the various sectors? I mentioned 3 sectors. You can also tell me more about that, or any other sectors where we could see this. So what are the market dynamics that we are likely to see with regards to rooftop PV? Manu,
it's difficult to comment. Yeah, it's difficult to comment, Jay, and great to meet you again, Chintan, though virtually. See, I mean, when we talk about, say, in the coming 2 decades, when we talk about markets, the key thing to really get into is the supply and demand equation. And while definitely I think enough has been said in terms of that suppliers will only be increasing, and we are likely to find new and new entrants entering the fray. I think just the last week, CII as well as the USAID, they've launched a rating program for vendors in the country. So they think that currently we are sitting on close to about, say, 100, which can become, say, around 400 in the next just about 3 years. So looking at this kind of exponential growth from the supply side, I think there is going to be a lot of more the merrier kind of situation, and not really a big constraint. Now let's come to, say, from the demand side, and I think you have touched upon a few sectors. And I'll actually sort of tend to take a step back even before venturing into a sector and just talk about and think together like a consumer. Now, as a consumer, what you exactly are looking for? You're just looking for a plug-and-play solution which will provide you electricity, and that's about it. And let's take a look at, say, RTPV. Now, the first thing a consumer has to sort of put their heads together on is how much potential my given particular rooftop has, if at all it has any potential. Because there are many variables which are very site specific. For example, you have shadow constraints, you have the kind of angle which has to be determined, and things like that. And the moment we have sort of transcended this particular question, the next question comes in. What are the kind of regulatory issues I need to sort of tend to take care of? Not only for the first time at the time of commissioning, but on an ongoing basis. Like many of my core panelists sort of mentioned about having a very consistent regulatory framework. Now, that is the easy part of the thing, even if we do get there. I think the second part of the challenge is, as consumers, how do we react to it? Just managing the day-to-day regulatory frameworks and probably putting our thoughts to, like, this year the tariff is like this, the next year sort of changing. Why? So look also into, I would say, the political economy of how regulators would react to it in terms of making those changes. The third aspect is, I think, more fundamental and more, I would say, unique to the Indian context. Now, unlike, say, a Germany, which is known to be a pioneer as far as RTPV goes, or say other such places which are known for pushing RTPV, there are two key metrics. One is the temperature profile, which leads to a certain degradation of the panels. The second is the element of dust, which you get in the Indian geographies. Now, I will actually dwell more on the dust part because that is, frankly, much more, I would say, relevant to the Indian consumer. Now, looking at it from a very consumer perspective, yes, my panels can generate, it can give me electricity, but the basic challenge is, even if I buy the best of equipment today, by maybe spending, say, double the amount, which is the sanctioned amount of, say, 40,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, in spite of that, my generation side is still not going to be, you can say, fully determined or be 100% of what it was to be. Why? Because dust could play the spoils. So solar PV, especially the panels, are only as good as how you maintain them. And now, not I would say, not how good you sort of tend to buy them. So the basic point I'm coming to is, I think in the Indian context, take a look at, say, CNI consumer segment. It's like jumping by leaps and bounds. One of the reasons is you do have a big employee base to take care of the dusting and other such aspects, which is actually not available, say, in the home consumer segment. And I think the fourth point which I would like to lay down is, while I'm very much sanguine about the prospects for RTPV, I'm not really sure how much of this would actually materialize in the urban context. Largely because I feel that going forward, I mean, one of the speakers mentioned that 70% of the buildings are yet to come up, a number which is practically static for the last 15 years. But nevertheless, the point I'm trying to make is that how much of these 70% buildings would have rooftops? I think that's a key question we should be asking. And as urban, I think, citizens, I think COVID has certainly sort of demonstrated to many of us that urban rooftops play a very pivotal role in terms of providing you that open space, which actually you don't get currently. So the point is, how many of us going forward in an RWA would be open to the idea of covering up all of that through an RTPV kind of system, compromising other functions for which that rooftop is made available for. And of course, I think there's always the aesthetics point, which maybe in India currently we are not grappling with, but then abroad, definitely this is a big issue. So I think at this point, I will sort of looking into the dynamics. You spoke about the next 2 decades. I think these are the broad contexts which I think will be playing out.
Thank you, Manu. That was very good. So now I think perfect segue to Chintan. You've been in Suzlon and now you're with IREDA. You know, I don't know whether we can call it you've moved fences, but the real question here is now, given your experience, what kinds of mechanisms or supports or policy push do we see or should we expect from from the Indian government to make sure that RTPV is actually primary in its generation of energy in the, I don't know, urban context, could be rural context, or I would say GHG in general, right? If you're looking at the GHG perspective over the long term, what do you think are the places where the pushes can happen?
Yeah, thanks. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. I think let's be practical first. What should be the regulatory framework is more like a wish list, but no regulatory framework can come in without understanding the underlying policy setup which is prevalent in India. So when we're talking about rooftop photovoltaic, I think we are talking about three major segments. One is residential rooftop, which is a very altogether a different segment. Other is the commercial buildings, and third is industrial linkages. Now, these three has got three different dynamics from the policy perspective as far as the power sector market is concerned. Now, if you see the tariff orders of various commissions, you would also realize that there's a little bit of an under recovery as far as residential is concerned in India. I mean to say the cost to serve model does not prevalent, it's not prevalent in India. So the cost to deliver electricity may be about 6 rupees or 7 rupees for a residential consumer, while that same consumer is essentially paying 3 rupees 50 paisa. So residential rooftop is always a positive for any distribution company. Then you'll find that in residential rooftop, there would be no hindrances, essentially on the regulatory side, because it benefits a distribution company for two counts. One is it's a drain as far as recovery of money is concerned, and second thing is that also helps you in reducing the T&D losses, because you are essentially generating electricity near the consumer near the load center. It's an advantage. You find particularly in states like Delhi, which is a city state, the discoms are so aggressive at people to push for a residential rooftop. It's a different story. You may not have roof in Delhi or in big areas, but residential rooftop essentially would pick up traction by through every distribution company. Just a sec. Would get traction in any area. Now the question today is, how do you essentially explore this segment? Now the question that Manu raised, that what should be the shadow, what should be the consumption, where to put it, these are something which obviously you cannot go and educate each and every residential consumer. That's where I come to a model like you have the Tata Sky model in India, where essentially if you want to become a Tata Sky consumer, what you do? You just buy a Tata Sky module from the market, and the dealer would essentially call the installer, and they would come and install this entire thing, and they'll exactly find out where the dish should be put up, how to draw the lines, because they have been training these people and they're very good at it. I think something do it yourself model would make a great sense for rooftop solar photovoltaic in residential segment. I think it will be a big hit. Now you require some people to essentially get into this market and serve it, and they can also have something where very typical at Tata Sky model, where essentially you have a set top box. You don't have to pay money for the entire capex which is installed, and you can recover based on the consumption. I think a lot of modeling can be done there, and this is what in Europe and all people actually do it yourself model as far as residential rooftop is concerned, where essentially they buy the things from the market, install it on their own. And I think a lot of people can do it in India. If they can't do it, you have service providers for doing that, like the Tata Sky model. That essentially puts the residential rooftop issue at one go. The larger question comes in a commercial and industrial area. Now, obviously, because of the cross-subsidy element in the power sector, uh, the recovery money is more than the cost of delivery. So obviously, there will be a resistance from a distribution company, bound to be. And essentially, both C and I segments are just not high-paying consumers; they are prompt-paying consumers. So you will be losing both element in one go the moment they go towards residential roof or rooftop solar photovoltaic. because they pay always prompt. Any commercial consumer or industrial consumers, they pay more, they pay prompt. That's where the major challenge is. And we've been seeing various regulatory frameworks in different states. You can't say that what happens in Maharashtra would actually happen in Gujarat or would happen in Rajasthan. So every state has developed a different model on the regulation side for CNI segment. And that's unfortunately because India is a federal country and every state distribution company is unique in its own way. And they got their own issues in their different manner. So this is something which is is a challenge today, and I would say that this is a learning curve. The curve would definitely go in favor of rooftop photovoltaic, but obviously it's something which is learn while you go types. And you already have a RESCO model created for CNI segment, which is now getting very recognized even by the bankers. We've been financing those projects on a RESCO model. And then you have the third model, which is essentially utility-based rooftop solar model, where again it's a big hit. For example, railways itself calls bid, educational institution calling bid, and basically most of the government entities calling bid on their roof and for revenue sharing purpose. So this is something which is now getting picked up. But I agree with the overall picture that I think it's high time. The market potentially is huge. It's massive. It makes a great sense for using rooftop solar photovoltaic because it essentially helps the baseline, or I would say the profitability of any entity, which in turn creates more capital. The same capital can be invested for either expansion or to become more competitive for any CNI segment. So this definitely needs to be kept in picture. And I think it's high time that maybe a forum is created where they start drafting minimum regulations required. What is required is a wish list. I think that's something that can pursue parallelly. But what is the minimum thing? Okay, this is the minimum thing the regulations would give across India. It's as simple as gross metering and net metering. It's a very simple regulation, but very important. Or that behind the meter regulation. Now, every state has taken a very different view on behind the meter regulation as far as the CNI segment is concerned. So this is, I would stop over here and hand it over to you.
Thank you. So, I'll come back to you with another question because you did touch upon some of the things that I was going to ask in my subsequent question. But let me just jump to Manu now. Let me ask you some. I know I'm putting you on the spot, but if you were to put in a number to say that, okay, this is how much of our entire solar energy capacity or even generation that we want to get by, let's say, 2050, what percentage do you think should come from RTPV? And obviously the question is loaded in the aspect of what do you feel is the potential for this decentralized distributed energy perspective here?
Okay. I think, if I go back, say, by projections, India has the potential for overall solar of close to, say, about 750 gigawatts, of which, yes, I think Sarthak only sort of mentioned at the outset some numbers about 250, 300 is only RTPV. I would actually take a more conservative view. I'll go with the number which was projected by Terry in terms of the commercially realizable RTPV, which was closer to around 125 gigawatts. Now, this is as far as the numbers go. Now, let's also take a view in terms of coming back to what Chintan sort of really added in terms of these plug-and-play modules. If, say, a Tata Sky kind of concept sort of emerges, now, would these numbers change? I think so. Dramatically, they would change because now you would not be looking at rooftops alone. You will be looking at maybe just 1 square foot kind of spaces, and then there you have a rooftop, RTPV, right? So I think the kind of, I would say, the potential which will now emerge, you take your pick. You can definitely easily sort of double it up.
Right.
So I guess in just of pure play numbers, I think this is the way to go.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So, Chintan, coming back to you, you did talk about this whole idea of consumer awareness, and I think it is definitely important. We need to look at this model where people can do it yourself. I know it may not be totally do it yourself as much as we would like to think. At the end of the day, we have to get somebody to come and install it. But do you see any potential here for the idea of the entire ecosystem? Because it's not just about installing that rooftop. There is more to it than just installing the rooftop. So from the perspective that you come from Suzlon, and you've seen this entire perspective, what is your take on this entire ecosystem and it changing the way we think about work, the nature of work in the energy industry over these next 20 to 30 years?
I think the ecosystem definitely exists in India. India is a very price sensitive market, and rooftop solar photovoltaic definitely gives you a benefit on the economic side, which I think everybody appreciates in India. As far as the stakeholders are concerned, they are very much there. I think your day-to-day electrician that comes to visits your house can actually install a rooftop solar photovoltaic so easily, because apart from the structure, everything else is electrical. So what is required is maybe a very focused training program or skill development program, upgradation programs for the existing service providers who are anywhere there, spread across India. You have to enhance those skills, and it's an additional income for them, and you're able to exploit this market. So that ecosystem very much exists. Ecosystem for CNI is anywhere there, because they're larger projects, and you're dealing with professionally run companies, and this ecosystem will keep on getting created as the market expands. So I don't foresee, again, as far as ecosystem issue is concerned, no. But a larger problem that comes in, how does one finance it? That is where the trick comes into picture. As a banker, since we are a banker, the biggest problem a rooftop solar photovoltaic has is there is no mortgage. So you have just hypothecation. And in hypothecation, if it's a captive consumer, it's much easier. But if it's a RESCO, you have another problem, because when you have a RESCO who does not own the roof and going to install a roof, how does one finance those projects? That creates a major problem for any of the lender in India. And then the issue of substitution right comes into picture. And substitution right is very less known as far as the Indian law is concerned. So this is something which is tricky. And frankly speaking, there is no adequate case law created for that. So this is something, this needs to be looked upon when we are going to go to a fair amount of size, when you need to allow bankers and financial institutions across India finance those projects. Third issue that comes up in terms of ecosystem is the transaction cost to finance such projects is normally high, because these are small size projects. For a traditional banker who's been financing wind and solar, becomes very tough for them to finance a 300 kilowatt project or a 1 megawatt project. So the size definitely creates a problem in terms of transaction cost. So that means, again, we need to create linkages of various NBFCs across India and various MFIs across India, who essentially would finance the last mile, so that they take up the credit risk and not the central banker. The central banker can essentially provide line of credits to those NBFCs and MFIs, who in turn can then provide credit to people to the markets which are nearer to them, and they understand those markets much better than any large NBFC or a large bank. So this is something that we need to evolve upon, and I think market is the biggest driver for that. Once the market explodes, I think these setups and these structures would anyway be created, because most of the bankers and NBFCs are hungry for credit growth. Over to you, Dr.
Thank you very much. So you know what, I thought I should open the thing for questions from the audience, if there are any questions. I do see one question that I'll just pose to you very quickly. I mean, maybe a quick answer. I know, Manu, you questioned the idea of where are these buildings going to come from, and that these 70% buildings we've been hearing about for the past 10 years. Question is, do you see an opportunity for, say, regulation saying all new buildings coming up should have a rooftop? I mean, all new buildings which have solar insulation on them should come up with rooftop PV on them. I know in Bangalore there was this rule that came up that if you didn't have a solar hot water heater on your roof, you will not get an electrical connection, and that actually pushed the solar hot waters in Bangalore. Do you foresee some kind of regulation like that could help push the tide or change the tide as far as India is concerned?
A very difficult question to say, because I think Chintan and other panelists have already pointed out, one size cannot fit all in a country like India. And Bangalore, yes, I agree. I mean, this kind of policy which they had, but do they still have the same policy? I'm not really sure. Maybe 20 years back, yes. I mean, but maybe today, I don't really think there's a need for that today. So coming back to the basic query is that, can regulation really push? We do have subsidies, say 40% subsidy is already there, and maybe 20% till all the way going till about 10 kilowatt. Has it pushed RTPV? I think this is the beginning question we should be asking. And I think subsidies or regulatory pushes are not the only thing. And eventually the consumers will have a very unique psyche in terms of what to adopt and what not to adopt. And this is, I think, better left to them. But having said that, I can just share with you a personal, I would say, experience which I had regarding RTPV as an RWA. Now, I'm in Delhi, and in Delhi, I think about 3 years back, we had all the sort of schemes going for it in terms of subsidy and all. I think thereafter they have sort of withdrawn the subsidy, but at that point in time, the subsidy was still there. And we were, as an RWA, exploring making use of our rooftops. So I think the first challenge definitely was a technical challenge in terms of doing the assessments. So definitely, I think that's taken care of through all the resourceful members in the RWA. The second aspect is how do you finance that? And coming back to Chintan's point squarely, I think even financing fundamentally is not really an issue. I mean, if you're looking at, say, at that point in time, say around 50,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, and you have a system worth, say, about at least, I would say, 20 kilowatt hour, I mean, you are looking at, say, a capex of, say, about 10 to begin with. That is a fairly, I would say, manageable deal as far as an RWA goes. Now, the question is not that. The question is one-time capex you can handle. What happens to the ongoing, I would say, benefits? Who owns those benefits? For example, today there's a tenant, tomorrow there's another tenant, right? That's one. The more tricky part is today there is one owner, tomorrow there's another owner. So while you have paid for it, assuming in the hope that for the next 20 years you are there and after 3 years you simply move on, then what happens to all your so-called invested costs, which you have invested into the RWA piece? So I think that's where I think the recent experiments of various business models wherein the idea was to push it from the utility end. For example, I mean, nobody's really questioning the fixed assets which a utility is billing you through your fixed costs every month in your electricity bill. I think something like that, if say the utility-driven model is there, that you kind of share your sort of rooftops wherever they might be, and the utility itself sort of arrives at a certain fixed cost and bills you in the metering in the electricity bill itself. I think that might be a more acceptable model going forward compared to any other model which you may sort of tend to consider, unless and until you have your own sort of private rooftops available. But I would say, as the way sort of India is exploding vertically, RWAs are the norm, and I think we will have to sort of channelize business models which can sort of tackle their own set of unique problems.
So Chintan, any closing thoughts on this aspect of, one is of course regulation, I think he's talked a lot about it, but where do you see any potential here of us leveraging RTPV to achieve that zero? I mean, at the end of the day, we're all talking about decarbonizing, getting to a net zero in some ways. Where do you see potential in the next, say, a decade or two to take us in that direction? Where do you see that? Yeah.
I think, I need to again clarify here. When we say net zero is just not limited to electricity. Electricity is a secondary energy. Primary energy still is much, much larger. The amount of energy we use in the industry, direct energy, in terms of coal, oil, and gas, that is something which is more important to handle on net zero. Electricity net zero maybe is achievable much earlier, but energy net zero is where the major challenge comes into picture. And I think in the last couple of months there has been a huge traction towards creation of a green hydrogen economy globally, just not in India, globally. And the green hydrogen essentially creates that linking directive or a linking pin of bridging the electricity with the primary energy. Now, hydrogen being a fuel can keep on replacing the direct fossil fuel in terms of oil and gas as well as coal. And there have been a lot of studies on this. A hydrogen mission that has been thought about by NITI Aayog, which is under preparations. There have been a lot of webinars on that. NITI Aayog is trying to tell people that this is what they're planning. And even globally, what has been now thought is by 2050, the entire world has to go on a net zero model. Then hydrogen seems to be the only viable option for the future. And this is an advantage because nobody was talking about green hydrogen about 3 years back. And the reason was very simple, the pricing. With pricing coming down on the solar front at a global level, and also on the wind side, it becomes a very promising alternative to essentially use the renewable energy sources to create hydrogen and use that hydrogen to transport and utilize it at various industrial sectors. Now, for example, in India itself, you have the major industry, which is fertilizer, as well as steel, which can be important candidates to use hydrogen itself. And they essentially represent something like 40% of the total CO2 emissions. That's true across the world for any economy. And that too when both the sectors are growing. Try to understand. Steel sector as well as fertilizer sector, both are growing, because in case of fertilizer, when your productivity per hectare goes up, obviously your requirement of fertilizer also goes up. And that's where it's a growth sector, which essentially uses ammonia or natural gas, which is derived from fossil fuel in a way. So that is something that is a low-hanging fruit for any country. And similarly, coking coal for steel, which is also a fossil fuel. But these two are definitely most important candidates to move towards a net zero target. The residential sector, I know, but it's a very, very small segment as far as CO2 emissions are concerned. And if you add CNI, okay, a little bit more. But a larger picture is this. I think solar would have, or rather renewables would have a larger picture to move towards a green economy in terms of green hydrogen economy, which is in a concept of recycle economy. That's what it says. Essentially, that's an ultimate recycle economy where you use the natural resource, be it hydro, be it wind, be it solar, convert into hydrogen, use that same hydrogen to propel the economy. So it's a circular economy. That's what everybody's been talking about. And I think I'm quite sure you guys will have seminars and webinars on green hydrogen maybe 1 year down the line, because if you essentially do a research globally, the major activity is happening towards green hydrogen nowadays. That's it.
Right. So I think, that is a topic that you're opening up, and you could spend hours again on that. So we will definitely call you when we do that. And I can tell you it'll be sooner than a year. It's not going to be that long. It's going to be much sooner than that. So, I think we have pretty much run out of time. I think we have to be very conscious of everybody's time. Thank you, everyone, for your time, spending time with us, giving us your thoughts. I hope this is just the beginning. We are definitely going to reach out to you. get more thought pieces out. I think this is a very vibrant and interesting sector. I think we are excited about it at CSTEP. We are looking to build a major RTPV program, looking at how rooftop PV can be taken throughout the country, not just in Karnataka, but in other states. And I really look forward to engaging with both of you and with the rest of the people. So thank you, everyone. Back to you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jay, Mr. Manu and Mr. Chintan for such an insightful discussion. Now it's time to conclude the webinar. So I would welcome Mr. Abhishek Nag, Head of Energy and Power Sector at CSTEP, for providing concluding remarks and word of thanks. Over to you, Abhishek.
Okay. Yeah, so it has been a very interesting 1.5 hour session, and we are just 2 minutes away from the 7 o'clock time that we had planned to wind up. I think I will not try to sum up things because in both sessions there have been various points, and it will be very difficult to sum up things, but I like to pick something one from each of the speakers and try to sort of what one of the highlights I'll pick, and maybe just to sum that up. So first, thanks to Mr. Pulipaka for participating and being with us. I think you have been the industry voice. There is no doubt about it. And I think one of the things we understood from you that you talked about was affordable financing to be made available to smaller. You said MSME, but let MSME players. But I think one can always assume that to be a player which is not large, now who cannot handle things on his own, and along with aggregation of demand. And I think this is also one of the points that Chintan mentioned, from looking at it from the other side, from a banker's perspective, that he talked about how to fund, say, small projects. What is the case law for them? How do we hypothecate, or how do we do that? So I think this was one question which was addressed by two speakers, and I think we had two perspectives of this: one the industry perspective, and one the banker's perspective on it. So I think that's an issue. One issue we can think of taking forward in some way, maybe through further. I mean, that's something for us to investigate and work upon, both along with NSCFI and IREDA. Coming to Mr. Bahar in the first session, I think you said one thing that I really liked very much. I mean, the simplicity with which you put it, that energy efficiency, renewable energy, which is solar and wind that you talked about, and electrification can lead to net zero, and RTPV is one of the solutions that can incorporate all three. I think to me that was one thought I will take away from here and look at it more deeply. Of course, we look forward to the launch of your report, where you are looking at 27 challenges and 27 solutions. Coming to Manu, I think Manu has so vast experience, and it will be, it was, I think, right on his part to play that cautionary, to give us that cautionary note that yes, RTPV is a great technology, but it's only as good as we maintain it. And together with this, Chintan also said that we need to create awareness and among the stakeholders, as well as develop do-it-yourself solutions.
So I think the two of you have pointed out to the ground realities very well. One is on one side, whether the electrician coming to the house can do it, can we do it ourselves? And Manu, what you said about maintaining it. So maybe the electrician coming to the house can also maybe train to maintain it and do it regularly. I mean, just offering it as an idea. But thank you for that note where you cautioned, and I mean, we should not probably become over ambitious, though no doubt Catalyst will have its role, and it will certainly be able to if not I mean key, it can provide the key to the movement, if not overshadow other things. With that, I like to thank also Dr. Jayasindhi for moderating the second session, Saptak for handling the first session, Jaymin for conducting, being the anchor of this session, and the whole of CP team, Shumali, Merlin, Shirekha, Dhruv. I mean, Neha. Thanks a lot to all of them. I'm sure I have missed somebody. Like I missed Pratha. And others I may have missed. So let us thank you everybody for being there, and we will try to take this forward in some way, either on the RTPV basis, or we can try to address some other thing. Maybe it could be something like hydrogen that you talked about, or something like ground level issues like awareness in training and education and things like those. So definitely looking forward to interact with you in future, and thank you all for being there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you.